see a searchlight too soon after capsizing in the North Pacific Ocean hide. A few years ago, I was working as a deckhand on an Alaskan fishing boat. From a young age, my parents instilled in me a strong work ethic. They always said hard work leads to greater returns, so I naturally gravitated towards a career that shared that philosophy. Alaskan fishing added high risk to the equation, and in turn, the rewards were even sweeter. I couldn't imagine doing anything else, and planned on working my way up to captain one day. This story takes place during my 5th crabbing season. By then, I knew the ropes, I was familiar with the waters, and I'd witnessed a few deaths firsthand. I thought I was prepared for anything. I was dead wrong. We were a crew of 15, myself included, when the season began. That number would be halved by the time we returned to shore, and I would be left incapable of setting foot anywhere near the ocean ever again. I was sailing on the Seaward Sarah, a vessel that was getting a little long in the tooth, but was known for her reliability. Since she passed her safety inspection earlier that year, I had no concerns as we left port for the cold waters of the North Pacific Ocean. It was exhilarating to be on the sea again, with the fresh salty breeze and waters so vast, you couldn't see anything but blue for miles around. Spirits were high and the excitement of starting off on a new journey was electric. We always hold a party on the first and last nights. It was tradition. Even the captain would join in and dance and sing and drink. We noticed the first sign of trouble 2 days into the journey. The Seaward Sarah was listing on her starboard side. It wasn't at a dangerous angle, and after consulting the ship's engineer, the captain determined it was safe to proceed farther into the North Pacific Ocean. He planned on balancing her out once we started loading crabs into the cargo decks. We're overfill the port cargo and underfill the starboard. I didn't question the plan. It seemed reasonable, and besides, I was just a deckhand. The captain could piss in my mouth, tell me it was wine, and I'd smile and agree. That's the way it works at sea. I grew more concerned as the voyage went on. The list worsened over the course of the next week. It went from a barely noticeable incline to my calves burning from straining against the pull of gravity towards starboard. That's when the captain started making a lot of calls. I couldn't hear what was going on, but I could see him shouting into the receiver, his face getting redder and angrier as the days wore on. I was told he was cursing everyone from the ship manufacturer, to the inspectors, to the contractors who'd last done repair work on her hull. I was told it was business as usual. One evening, when most of us were gathered in the dining hall, holding our plates and glasses to keep them from sliding down the table, the captain burst in and announced we were turning around. Our reactions were mixed, with some experiencing relief and others disappointment. No one knew what this meant for our wages, or whether the repairs could be done in time to get back at sea before the end of crab season. I was one of the ones who was relieved by the news. The vast ocean I'd been yearning for months had become progressively more unsettling as the ship tilted. I became keenly aware just how far away I was from dry land, from safety. This place I found freeing suddenly felt like a cage, and I wanted out. I felt the Seaward Sarah turn as I headed back to the crew quarters, and used the wall for support. The combination of the dime turn and the ship's tilt were terrible for my equilibrium. I needed to lay down and let myself adjust. I don't know what would have happened if the storm hadn't hit later that night. Would the Seaward Sarah have limped home safely? Would she have rolled over along the way? I'll never know now, because the storm did hit. One that seemed to come out of nowhere, barely being caught by the radar before its waves, and rain started pelting the ship with the fury of an angry sea god. The Seaward Sarah groaned in pain as her list worsened even more. Doors flew open, objects fell and hit me as I staggered up the hall and towards the deck. I didn't realize just how bad it had gotten until I felt my feet touch the wall, and realized the wall was becoming the floor. I was still inside when I heard the call to abandon ship. I was bruised, groggy, and disoriented. Enough water had gotten in from somewhere that I was also soaked. I felt a pair of hands grab me by the shoulder and usher me forward when I stopped to take a breath. I know at some point I donned a life vest, but I couldn't tell you when or how I got it on. All I remember is the surreal sensation of the world changing directions inside the ship, and the sight of tall waves illuminated by lightning once outside. Thunder drowned out the screams of my shipmates, but I could see them scrambling to launch a lifeboat. I threw myself towards them, but before I could catch a handhold, I felt a wall of ice-cold water drag me into the railing. The second wave, the reaction to its action, reached over the rail and pulled me into the water. The pain was unbearable. Not only had I been tossed around like a rag doll, but the water felt like I'd rolled into a vat of quicksand made of sharp needles. I didn't know which side was up and which was down, but thankfully, the life vest lifted me back to the turbulent surface. The water had gotten into my ears, muffling the sound of the storm, and I tried to flail my arms hoping for rescue, but I couldn't lift them, I couldn't stop threading water long enough. This hell went on for longer than I cared to reflect on. I just know wave after wave pulled me under, but the jacket always brought me back up long enough to catch my breath. When I close my eyes, even years later, I can still feel the unrelenting assault of the waves mingling with the taste of salt on my tongue. I was going to die, I was sure of it. Either by not breathing in when I had a chance, or by drowning from rainwater in my mouth whenever I screamed. And then, I felt a tug, and my horror amplified tenfold as I imagined being in the jaws of a sea serpent about to pull me into the ocean depths. I thrashed desperately trying to escape, only to hear Greta's voice chastising me. "Stop that. I'm trying to pull you in." Greta hoisted me onto the lifeboat, and once I was over the edge, I slipped the rest of the way in, landing in wet and bloody water. I could hear orders being shouted at me, but all I could do was curl up and wait, utterly useless. I know the others were preoccupied by something, as they started rowing as hard as they could. In hindsight, I think they were trying to get clear of the whirlpool of the sinking ship. The storm passed almost as quickly as it arrived. The ocean wasn't as quick to calm, but the turbulence lessened to a manageable degree. When I was finally able to, I sat up and took inventory of my surroundings. I found myself in a lifeboat with 7 other crewmates. All that was left of the Seaward Sarah were bubbles rising from the depths of the ocean. Miraculously, there was a second lifeboat paddling towards us, and once we connected, we were overjoyed to find that every single crew member had survived the capsizing. The captain, who was in the other raft, shouted over the water in a deep, booming voice. We sent out a distress call before she went down. "They have our coordinates. It won't be long." I hoped he was right, because my hands were trembling from the cold and the quickly depleting adrenaline. We tied the rafts together, took stock of our supplies, food, first aid, and then waited. Now, you would think that there'd be cheering when the light appeared on the horizon, that all hands would start to paddle and wave and celebrate. Instead, there was a sudden and deathly silence as a communal swell of anxiety filtered into us. There were haunted expressions on Greta and John and Sarah and even the captain's faces. The latter was holding the flare gun, but his finger was tapping nervously on the trigger. Sometimes, without knowing why, you get a bad feeling. People call it a sixth sense, but I think it's simpler than that. I think it's dangerous perceived but bypassed by the brain so you can act faster than you can think. Kind of like how you can actively analyze a person's body language to get more information than you'd get from hearing their words alone. But even if you're not trying to, you still subconsciously notice the little signs showing discomfort or anger or attraction. It's innate. What we think we perceive is only scratching the surface of all the information we truly take in. The brain, our consciousness, focuses on one thing, but our survival instinct notices the other discrepancies. And when it does, it signals danger without telling you why. It's not moving, Greta whispered. She hit the nail on the head. She connected the dots outlining the proverbial red flag. When she did, a sort of unspoken acknowledgement traveled through the group as one by one, we noticed it too. You see, there were two problems with the light. The nearest ship to ours was at least another 5 hours away, probably longer if they hit the same storm we had. The light was perfectly still, staying at the same height and never once bobbing along with the ocean surge. It also wasn't sweeping the ocean, as one does when searching for survivors. You see, it had appeared way too fast, only about a half hour after the storm had passed. It was extremely unlikely that an unknown ship had been in the area. We all try to keep tabs on one another because, in such turbulent waters, knowing where everyone is a question of life and death. Yes, we're technically all competing against one another, but you'd be hard-pressed to find any seaman unwilling to drop everything to save another in a pinch. There's a code of honor we all follow. But suppose this was an unknown vessel responding to our distress call ... We still had to contend with the second issue of its unnatural immobility. My stomach contorted, wondering what it meant. This light was fixed on a single point in the near distance. It was glowing, no, pulsating, but it never once moved on any sort of axis like it should if it was searching the water, and it was immune to the push and pull of ocean waves. There's not a ship on Earth that can do that. The only reasonable explanation was it might be a Coast Guard helicopter hovering perfectly in place and dangerously low. But then again, even if it had been deployed the second the distress call was sent, a rescue chopper couldn't have gotten to us that fast. The light was impossible. The light felt menacing. The light acted like a lure, goading us to come to it. The boom of an explosion snapped me to reality, and it was followed by a crackle up above. The captain had fired off one of the flares. It hung in the air, slowly fizzing in a downward arch. I remember feeling so scared I dug my fingers into the lifeboat. The shot was one thing, but my fear had to do with the light. I was so afraid it would come closer now that it knew for sure where we were. I was more afraid of that light than I have ever been of anything in my entire life. But thankfully, it stayed away. Row, the captain ordered. No one moved, not even to breathe. Row, damn it. John reached for the paddle, but Greta grabbed him by the forearm and stopped him, shaking her head. The captain glared at us with bulging eyes. He'd adopted an authoritative stance, but even he wasn't able to suppress his quakes of fear. If one followed logic, he was right. We should head towards the light. And yet, the longer we stared at the unwavering thing, the more it unsettled us. It's funny how something as simple as bobbing up and down could have alleviated our anxiety. But the light didn't do that. Not even once. Faced with a soft immunity, the captain grumbled and grabbed a paddle of his own. Fine, he hissed, I'll go. Any man or woman too cowardly to come can transfer to the coward's raft. He gestured to us. Anyone with balls, come with me. We need to flag the ship down before it moves on without us. The flare hit the water and spat out a few more dying embers. I was surprised to see a few crewmates get up. John and a couple others transferred over to the captain's raft. An equal number transferred to the coward's raft. With contempt on his sour, sea-worn face, the captain cut the lines between us and directed his raft towards the searchlight. Even as they rowed off, we pleaded with them not to go. But it was like they'd been infected with bravado. I could hear them chanting in a rhythm. Left, right, until they were a blip on the horizon. 10 minutes after the voices went quiet, at the estimated time the captain's raft would have reached the light, it suddenly blinked out of existence. The captain, John, and the other 5 crewmates on that raft were never seen or heard from again. The raft has never turned up. This, despite being outfitted with an emergency tracker. Planes equipped with the same tech have gone missing as well, so it could be that those trackers aren't worth much, but it still gives me nightmares to think what would have happened to me if we'd followed the captain. As for us, it took 7 hours, but eventually we were rescued by the crew of the Rose Shannon. As expected, the storm had delayed rescue attempts. They warmed us up and combed the waters where we'd last seen the captain's raft, abandoning the search only when the Coast Guard arrived and took over. That night, I had nightmares of the light growing closer and closer, and every time its glow was about to hit me, I'd feel a pressure in my head like it was about to explode, and a searing, burning pain on my skin. Then, I'd wake up drenched in sweat. I now work as a trucker, a mercifully landlocked job. I drive through all kinds of creepy locations. I've seen some things on this job, but nothing has ever scared me more than the light I saw that terrible night. I don't know if it's because of the lack of closure around the captain's raft, or if my subconscious saw something that it felt my brain was better off not knowing. I don't know. I don't like to think about it. But now that I've written this, I think I can finally move on, in a way. I still keep in touch with Greta. She's still working out there. Props to her for getting back on that seahorse. She now captains her own vessel. I couldn't be happier for her. But sometimes, when we're catching up, she talks about that night, and she always follows it up by saying another ship's been lost in that same area. I think they're up to 5 now. No survivors, although the final transmission of one of the ships mentioned seeing a light on the horizon. Sailors have come to avoid what they're calling the Alaska Triangle. Part of me wishes I knew conclusively what's happening out there, but I'm mostly glad I'm here on solid ground, far from the light.